Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's something I like to be called. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I want to start off with not entirely agreeing with Carol Beaumont, my colleague, who I'm following, because, Mr. Speaker, I had a period as State Services Minister, and it's fair to say that for a period of time it was relatively frustrating. And one of the frustrating things was the siloisation of the public service. That you'd have people who were doing exactly the same job from department to department, but their conditions were all different. They were all higgledy-piggledy. And we used to, especially in areas of shortage, in those days we weren't firing public servants. We were looking for good policy people and people who wanted to work hard in the implementation areas. And there was actually somewhat a shortage of the skills. And one of the problems that Dr. Cullen used to complain about occasionally to me as State Services Minister was that there used to be interdepartmental bidding. You know, that one department would bid for someone and someone would bid more and go back. And I think it's fair to say that over a period of time, salaries moved in a way that Dr. Cullen was uncomfortable with as Minister of Finance. The other point that I'd like to make to the member was, unfortunately, because too many of the chief executives had been appointed, especially in our early days, in the times of Bill Birch and others, they were of the group who were much keener on having individual contracts and much less likely to want to bargain. And in fact, we had this awful intransigence on the part of many employers, some of whom the chief executives actively resisted putting salary or wage levels into agreements. I mean, it was just, and the problem was, under the law, as ministers, we didn't have the power to work towards a set of policies that were enforceable and that could properly be implemented. And that's why I would say that while I'm going to sort of maybe admit that if this detail was carefully discussed within our caucus, I missed it. But Mr. Speaker, I want to say to my colleagues that in fact actually having governments that have policies rather than high-level statements and policies which can be enforced in the hands of a good government is a good thing. In the hands of a good government. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, you then go to the question about whether the Parliament should be designing legislation on the assumption that governments who are going to be using it are always going to be bad. Because what I want to tell my colleague Carol Beaumont is that good governments will do good stuff and bad governments will do stuff no matter what the law is. And therefore my view is that even from opposition, what we should be doing is developing the law in the format that we can use it properly from November next year or at some point earlier if John Key gets the pip, Mr. Speaker, and tosses in the towel. So if members opposite can see division in the ranks over here, it's probably true. There is a bit of a difference of opinion as to approach. I would like to see more multi-employer arrangements within the public service, and in fact where there are employment categories or employment classes, I would like to see common conditions. And I'll just, while we're at it, I'll really get the frustrations going and saying that I worked for about 18 months trying to get some common leave provisions across the public service.
How about in collective agreements?
I wanted to get them into collective agreements. Yeah, but the idea that some of the chief executives, at the very thought that ministers might have an opinion about having particular sets of leave arrangements that are common, and it wouldn't matter, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, it wouldn't matter if you were working in MSD or the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. I won't mention the Treasury, because they basically didn't have any common conditions, no collective agreements within the Treasury at all. Mr Speaker, but even the organisations which had collective agreements, they shuddered at the very thought that someone might have the same set of leave or sick pay provisions that were the same in one agency and the one next door where people are doing exactly the same work. And you know, there are a number of areas that, as a minister, I failed in, and one of them that I failed miserably in was in my attempt to get a system going where common conditions could be developed for people who were doing very much the same work from agency to agency. The fiefdoms were absolute. The silos weren't made of concrete. They were made of reinforced titanium, and people could not move. People could not move from one to another. And actually, if you're looking at areas like redundancy and things like that, or people, you know, sometimes it's by far the best thing for the public service overall if a particular individual shifts from one agency to another. Slightly better for them, but sometimes because of the skills that are required, Mr Chairman, it is better for the public service for the individual to shift. But when the conditions are so tight that in shifting from one agency to another, the individual loses a whole pile of long service leave arrangements or sick pay or holidays or a number of areas, it just doesn't happen, and the public service becomes inflexible and stayed as a result. So I say to my colleagues, the idea of having more than just common statements, having policies which are actually implemented is something which I think is desirable. Well, the member says not instead of collective bargaining. Actually, it should be the employer's position for the collective bargaining, and my view is the best advocates for common positions across the public service is in fact the Public Service Association. In fact, they were the ones with the most interest in having a public service that was relevant and flexible, and people were employed. Because the problem with the approach that happened under Birch and is happening now, what's that cigar-smoking minister? What's his name? Coleman.
Order.
Sorry?
Jonathan.
The Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman, or Dr. the Honourable, which one? The one that gets on so well in the corporate boxes, Mr. Speaker. The problem is that there are a number of departments whereby people are leaving and coming back as contractors, getting sometimes quite a handsome redundancy arrangement, and coming back weeks later, sometimes only working 3 days a week but for double the money. And Mr. Speaker, that is something which is outrageous, and it's something that we have to work against. This bill doesn't address it properly, and it is a gap in the amendments that we're currently considering. The other question that I'd like to ask the Minister, and I notice that I'm not going to refer to the absence of the Minister, but I'll refer to the fact that the Minister who is in the chair might be familiar with the legislation, but I'm sure he's capable of reading the briefing notes that come up. And what I would like to ask is, what are the implications for this bill for the State Services Commissioner if, in fact, the State Services Commissioner is going to be used as the recruiting agent by the Prime Minister for the new Commissioner of Police? And are there any changes as a result? I say that one of the early problems that we had when we were in government was a man called Doon, and there was a rapid appointment of a successor, but that also highlighted for a number of ministers that the recruitment process was just completely undefined. It was just up in the air. There was nothing. And I would like to know if there's something here, because, Mr. Chairman, we have a very serious problem coming up, because the heir presumptive for the position of the Commissioner of Police is someone who has very recently shown excessively bad judgment. Someone who has told them... Mr Chairman?
I call the honourable member to Uraroa Flavel.
Tēnā koe te chairman,
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.